Apple ginger sour cherry, delicious.
Okay, but talk more about it. What are the notes?
I got a little bit of apple, tangy, but in a good way. It's got a nice aftertaste. It tastes like day, like you're in New England. You're going like picking pumpkins.
Yes, that's why I created
Maybe in Boston at a flower shop.
Yes. Honestly, I went to an apple orchard in New York, in upstate New York, and bought fresh apple cider from there, and then had my Betty Buzz. It's a mixer. It's just like ginger.
Wow.
Real, not sugary. It's really good.
Hey besties, welcome back to my channel. Well, over the weekend, we broke some news over on Instagram about Blake Lively and the mystery declarant who showed up for Blake for her motion for like all kinds of money for 47.1, who had the recording of Steve Sarowitz and this person that accused Justin of being verbally not so nice to them. And then we also got some transcripts of testimony from 3 separate people: Vivian Baker, Danny Greenberg, and Warren Zavala and Danny Greenberg, who work for WME as agents, and then for Vivian Baker, who is the makeup artist for Blake. These transcripts were actually part of the response from Wayfair about the sanctions for 47.1, and it highlights that a couple things. All the filming occurred in New Jersey, and WME's position on what Blake was doing behind the scenes and how they viewed it more as extortion than hard bargaining. Yeah, so let's kind of dive into it. There was a lot of speculation about who this mystery declarant was, and there was so much news that dropped through the media that another person accuses Justin Baldoni of X, Y, and Z, right? The declaration is signed by the director of the indie film Empire Waste, Claire Ayub, who wrote and directed the film Empire Waste, which came out in theaters in September of 2024. The declaration is pretty irrelevant because ultimately this evidence will not be allowed into the courtroom in terms of like what her experience was, because this would be deemed propensity evidence. The claims she is making about Justin in her declaration are irrelevant to the set of It Ends With Us and have nothing to do with the claims that Blake Lively made. And there's a little bit weirdness in here about why she decided to pull him from publicity, but there wasn't a lot of publicity. It was a small film, and it was released like very limited into theaters. So the film Empire Waste came out at the end of September. It had a very limited run in theaters, about a week total. There was less than 100 total, or maybe just over 100 total theaters across the country that had it in their theaters. It was removed from theaters within a week. She announced that on her Instagram, and she said she got very bad news that they were pulling it from theaters. Generally, if a film is pulled from theaters that quickly, it means because it hasn't performed well and theaters don't have interest in giving space to a movie that's, the real estate. It's not going to make them any money. So it was then only allowed, and it was then continued on in 3 theaters, including the Wayfair Theater in Illinois, and it's now available on streaming. This was a low-budget film that was written by Claire. According to her social media and her interviews, this was a script that took years once she wrote it to go through development into anyone picking it up. And she was very specific that she had to be the director. And after years and years and years of not having a distributor for the film, Wayfair finally gave her a chance. The film production coincided with It Ends With Us. And so while he was working on the development of It Ends With Us, which was the bigger project here, she was casting for her film. And her film was much smaller in production, was not a known script, not a known IP. And so it was going to always be an indie kind of micro budget. And I don't know how much involvement Justin had other than he did video on Instagram or on TikTok where he announced that they were casting and they were looking for cast for this movie. And then Claire gave him a heart sign and was like, "Thank you, Justin." And then from there, the two films kind of were around in parallel to each other. So I don't actually know how involved Justin was as a producer on the set. I don't know. There was an actual like on-set producer that was someone she worked with that was a woman named Crystal. That's just from all of her interviews. So here's what that's my backstory to give you sort of an understanding of like this film. Pulled from theaters really quickly. It was a very small indie budget film. Took years to get a distributor, and now years later, she's cutting ties or helping Blake. So here's what the declaration says. I wrote and directed a film called Empire Waste, which was produced by Wayfair Studios. Justin Baldoni, a founder of Wayfair, was a producer. As part of my work on Empire Waste, I had repeated and negative interactions with Mr. Baldoni, his associates, including verbal abuse by Mr. Baldoni. I asked Wayfair that Mr. Baldoni not be permitted on set during the majority of production as a result of those experiences. Empire Waste was set to be released in the fall of 2024 in August of that year as a result of my experiences with Mr. Baldoni and ongoing press coverage relating to Mr. Baldoni, and It Ends With Us. I requested that he not be involved in Empire Waste's marketing or public relations efforts. Wayfair agreed to my request. Less than a week after reaching that agreement, I was contacted by the assistant of Steve Sarowitz, the co-founder and chairman of Wayfair, to schedule a time for me and Mr. Sarowitz to speak. Mr. Sarowitz's assistant did not identify a topic for that meeting. I feared that Mr. Sarowitz wanted to discuss my recent request relating to Mr. Baldoni, worried that Mr. Sarowitz might pressure me to abandon the prior agreement that I had reached with Wayfair. I recorded our meeting, and then a true and correct copy of the recording produced in Discovery as is being submitted with this declaration. Now, there is a Bates note here, which says the discovery is BL. So this means this recording was produced in Discovery by Blake, not through a subpoena, but by Blake. So that means that Claire gave her this audio recording without a subpoena, which would mean that Claire recorded this conversation and handed this over to Blake. When that happened, I don't know. What is also interesting here is that Steve Sarowitz has stated that he did not consent to having this conversation being recorded. And that is kind of a problem here because New Canaan, Connecticut, and Illinois, where Sarowitz lives, both states are two-party consent states, which means if you're in Illinois and you record someone without their knowledge, that's a crime. If you're in Connecticut when you make the call and you are speaking to that person and you're in a two-party consent, it's illegal. And that's the truth. And so I feared would want to discuss my recent request relating, and I worried he might pressure me. I think that's being added as sort of a defense for why she recorded. But Sarowitz, through his attorney, says he was not aware that the conversation was being recorded, nor did he consent. And because he's in Illinois, which is a two-party consent state, that matters. So I don't know how much this will actually be used for evidence. The only reason Blair cares to have this in evidence is because she wants this to be a part of the record, because she says that in this conversation with Claire, Sarowitz talks about there's going to be dead bodies. He compares it to Israel and Hamas on October 7th of 2023. And it has to do with her trying to create a nexus between this conversation and Sarowitz starting a conspiracy to destroy her. But telling someone that you will legally defend yourself against allegations is not the same as a conspiracy. I also just wonder why Blake would come up in this conversation unless, for instance, Claire contacts them and she brings up that she knows about what happened, and she heard what happened and she knew about the allegations, which is odd. I don't know how she would know that, because during that period of time, not much was known about what actually happened on the set unless she was in contact with Blake. So there's a lot of questions here about why she's recording someone without their consent. If the president or the chairman of the production company wants to speak to you about what's going on, if you're concerned about what might happen, I would say, you could bring a representative with you. You could jointly agree to have it recorded, but recording without consent is really sketchy. That's just my personal opinion, especially if it's a conversation with your producer and production company, and you guys all probably have NDAs as well for your own film. And then handing it over to Blake without a subpoena is another questionable move. And then it just makes me question, did she approach them specifically for Blake? Right? I don't know. These are all questions. But the long story short is Blake's trying to prove this is the reason why there was a conspiracy. And if this is what she has, that's not a very good amount of evidence, at least in my opinion. So I don't know anything about Claire. I don't have anything against Claire. I know that, Hollywood is a very romantic place and people often go and flock towards the people that they feel align with the celebrity that they want or what they think they can be given. And there might have been, more for her as a woman to want to go with Blake. I don't know. So that's who the declarant is. Don't attack her on Instagram. Don't go into her comments. Don't be mean. I really don't know anything beyond what she wrote. I just think the timing is suspect. I think it's really disrespectful to record someone without permission. And if she broke the law, she broke the law. I don't know. All right. Then when we come to the transcripts for the depositions, I think the most interesting one is Danny Greenberg, who is the agent who worked with Baldoni's agent, and the way that he described what was happening on the set. Her makeup artist, Vivian Baker, her testimony that was shared only had to do with the fact that she was in New Jersey when they filmed, and that during the second set of filming, she didn't witness anything inappropriate that happened on the set, which I think the way that Wayfair is going to frame this moving forward is that once Blake made these claims in November, everything was resolved and things moved forward. And then the set was fine moving forward. And then the dust up that happened afterwards happened because of creative differences, not because of her rising or making claims for sexual harassment, right? So she's claiming, all the animosity and the issues with the smear campaign and all of that had to do with, I brought forth claims of sexual harassment. And so they started the smear campaign. I think what Wayfair's defense is going to be is, well, really, it had more to do with creative differences. And they're going to try to poke holes at her credibility of, did she bring forth these claims with good intentions or was she malicious? Did she have malice when she brought these claims forward? So the transcript, I would say that's the most damning, is of Danny Greenberg. And he confirms that they filmed in New Jersey. And it shows that, in this part of the deposition, they're going through screenshots of conversations between text messages. And she's talking about, or Garofalo is asking him about different communications he had with Baldoni. And in one part, he answers and said, this was a text he sent to Baldoni. Yep. And I'm there to have your back and remind you, not that you need me to, that you are the man and you're going to crush this. And then there was another of Garofalo reading to Greenberg where she's reading again a text message of something he helped draft for Baldoni when he was speaking to Sony. And it says, they're your partners. It was theirs too, parentheses. You want to mention this AM event, their acknowledgement of the continued extortion and effort to gain control of the film. At the time you sent these suggestions for letters to Sony's, you sent to Mr. Baldoni. Had you had discussions with anyone at Sony about Miss Lively's effective attempt at extortion? Danny replies, I had an ongoing conversation with Angie Giannetti, the executive on the project, about the behavior that Blake was displaying along the way. And at this point in time, what was on the table was the premiere issue. So threatening to not go to the premiere if Justin was there, making threats along the way in escalating cumulative fashion. And then she says, you're choosing your words very carefully, aren't you? and then objections. And then I don't remember my state of mind when I wrote this letter. Miss Garofalo says, is it your practice to choose your words carefully when conveying an important message? He says, I do my best. And then she says, you used the word extortion in this chat, suggesting to Mr. Baldoni that he might write to Sony, correct? And Danny says, yes, it's in the text. And then that's a pretty strong word, isn't it? Which is Garofalo. And he says, it felt appropriate at the time. And then Garofalo says, you anticipated my next question. Thank you. Then you go on to say, but don't in any way put Sony on the defensive or indict them. Then, if you can be contrite in some capacity, very briefly acknowledging the two of you had your moments, which she would dissect your energy, word choice, and personality frequently, that led to mutual discomfort working with one another. And then parentheses, not everyone gets along kind of thing. Not all personalities are compatible. Now, when you're suggesting to Mr. Baldoni that he write something to Sony saying, other people have agreements or downplaying the agreements, did you believe that Mr. Baldoni was taking Miss Lively's conduct too seriously? And then he says, I'm not really following the question. And then she says, okay, I'll withdraw. And she says, you used the word extortion, correct? He said, yes. Sounds to me like you believed at the time of this chat on July 26, 2024, that it was more than just ordinary incompatibility between Mr. Baldoni and Miss Lively. Is that a true statement? And he says, I think my use of the word extortion there was referencing just cumulative behavior that the studio and Wayfair and Justin was having to manage. And so that's why I used word. And then she says, that would be more than just a disagreement between two different personalities, wouldn't it, Mr. Greenberg? And he answered, and then it gets cut off. We don't get the rest of this. Well, their personalities, again, I think the text speaks for itself, but I think they were not getting along. And I think it's important. And I was suggesting that he be, and then that's the end of it. So what's clear here is that he acknowledges that he was the one that was guiding Justin in his communication. He was dealing with the onset sort of escalating behavior by Blake. He's acknowledging or framing it as though Blake is using threats on the set and that he views what Blake is doing as an attempt to extort them to gain control of the film by making all these different threats based upon whatever it was that she was using. She was falling back onto that 17-point agreement. If you recall, the premiere had to do with Ryan calling Danny Greenberg and telling him that Baldoni was a sexual predator. So reintroducing the sexual issue was Ryan. And he was the one that was creating that hostility when there hadn't been issues around it. And again, Ryan is the guy that recently said that he was in competition with his son and he called his 2-year-old son violent. So he's not the best judge of character when it comes to other men. And then another issue I noted, another part of the transcripts I noticed was with Warren Zavala, and he was another agent with WME, and he went to the film set multiple times. And he said that the issues he experienced that were brought to him by Blake were not about sexual harassment, but were related to her complaints about the second phase or about the process around the testing of the cut of the film. So Baldoni and Wayfair were allowed to test the film because it's their movie and their IP, and she didn't know about it, and she got really mad. And so, okay, other than the issue relating to a testing of a cut of the film that Miss Lively didn't know about, any other complaints you heard from Miss Lively during the second phase of filming? From that point forward, yes, there was definitely issues in terms of her interaction, I think, with Justin and their collaboration in the final stages of post. So Zavala is saying again that the issues are not deriving out of sexual harassment, but of creative control. So you have Greenberg saying, when I'm dealing with Justin and I'm having to manage and navigate her behavior, and Sony's having to navigate and manage Blake's behavior, and Wayfair's having to manage and navigate her behavior, she's using threats and what he calls extortion to get control of this film, and it's escalating. And Zavala says that the only issues he heard about from Blake that she was mad about Justin with had to do with the edit and their post-production collaboration. So I think it's fair to say that, and I don't know what Blake's side is going to say, right? We're only seeing a portion, but what is here is pretty damning, right? If Blake was using threats to gain control, that would mean maybe she didn't bring the claims of sexual harassment forward with good faith. Maybe it was malicious, right? If Greenberg felt the cumulative behavior was that of extortion, that would imply malice. But that's what Wayfair is saying is like, you don't get to decide, judge, about this malice issue. We would have to go to the defense. This is our defense for the case. And our defense is that she brought these with malicious intent. Like there was malice behind this. So I have a lot of questions here. If Sony knew and then was endorsing her publicly, they're probably doing that to protect her. And, I just think that at the end of the day, if people have issues with Justin, that's going to happen on sets. If people have issues with Blake, that's going to happen on sets. But if Blake is weaponizing allegations of sexual harassment in order to gain control, that's a problem, a huge one. And Greenberg seems to think that that's what she was doing. So Greenberg is with WME today. He was the one that basically fired Baldoni as a client, and he's the one in testimony here almost defending Baldoni as a client. So where do you think the pressure came from to fire Baldoni if Greenberg is sympathetic to Baldoni still? And Blake's agent, Warren Zavala, I think he's also Brandon Sklenar's agent, but he's making it seem like he didn't know whether or not Blake had the contractual right to edit the film. So one of the claims is going to be is why would she be mad if they went and tested a film if she under her contract didn't have the right to edit? She had the right to see the film or a rough cut of the film, which she saw, but she wasn't the editor. She didn't have contractual rights to edit. She didn't have contractual rights to hire, right? And so again, their argument would be, well, if she doesn't have the rights to do these things, how was she getting this at the end? How did she get a cut? How did she get this film? Well, through Greenberg, he says extortion. So tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed, and please click the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, besties.